I always like to say a really good funeral brings the person who died back to life just for that time. You can feel their spirit and their energy. When I'm selling these cookie cutter funerals, I wasn't feeling that energy and that same kind of vibe that I do now when I help families. And that's what I meant when their grief is different, because they're celebrating somebody in a unique way versus kind of just showing up and going through the motions of what they think a funeral is, which is kind of what we've been doing for the past, I don't know, almost 100 years. And it hasn't really worked out very well for us, I don't think, here in America.
How hasn't it worked out well? What do you mean by that?
Well, I think what I mean is that comparably to other countries, we just haven't embraced death or tradition or cultural practices as much as we could. And the reason that's so important is death is a rite of passage. It is something that should be honored and celebrated, and we don't do that. And so I think a lot of people hold on to that grief, internalize that grief, and when grief doesn't have a space to move, like in other countries, they'll dance and wail at funerals and really move that grief through their body. In America, we don't do that. And so I think that it has a negative effect on us, whether that is that it turns into depression, that it turns into illness, that it turns into addiction. Um, so I think that we've been doing ourselves a huge disservice with the way that we grieve and have funerals here.
I tend to agree that even the most lively funeral services I've been to, where people are wailing and, crying and, a bit loud they're not, no one's up and dancing, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's, it's loud, it can be lively, and, you know, just, from my experience, black funerals are a little bit different than white funerals,
Oh,
generally
so much
speaking.
better. And I hate to say that in like, it's true though. I have been to many different funerals, and Black people know how to celebrate death and grieve loudly, and really, I think that's an exception to the rule here in America, is that it's a celebration, it's a going home, and I think that that is where we lack any sort of, there's no ritual there. We've kind of, as white Americans, I don't even like to put it that way, but they didn't hold on to those rituals. There's all sorts of different backgrounds, and so it turned into this really plain Jane, like, this is your funeral because you didn't bring in these traditions from Ireland. You didn't bring in your traditions from Norway, um, which is one of the things that I educate people on, is really go back in your history and see how your ancestors grieved, see how they had funerals, and bring that forward, because it worked then and it works now. It's not, how we grieve isn't broken. It is broken currently, but it wasn't broken for many, many, many generations. And I think Black funerals show that this has worked the way that they grieve for many, many generations. I do think, though, that kind of business and industrial aspect of the American funeral industry has affected that, though. It doesn't get to go on for days. They don't get to be have a viewing for 24 hours, because you have to pay the funeral home a large amount of money to rent for 24 hours versus they used to be in families' homes. They used to be in the community. They'd have huge celebrations there, giving people more time and more opportunity to grieve, versus now it's very scheduled. Here's 2 hours, maybe here's a reception, and move along.
How so many different questions come to mind.
Sorry.
Quite all right. We have time, right?
Yes.
So, how long ago did funerals go on for days? I mean, what are you referring to there? Like,
Hmm.
was there a point in American history where
Oh my
we had
goodness, yes.
longer funerals?
Yeah, definitely. Um, Even I want to say until like the 1920s, 1940s, most funerals were held in the home. I think people don't understand that a funeral home wasn't always the norm. it was created to mimic the family home where funerals had always taken places. Um, and so, yeah, we used to have these home funerals for multiple days. Typically, the first day, somebody would just be sitting with the body 24/7. People would come and go to pay their respects. And then the next few days were celebrations and parties. And the last day was a day of mourning before the burial took place. Um, and oddly enough, this is still happening in America. These home funerals for multiple days have always still been legal, are still just as safe as they were before. Um, but most families don't know, right? They don't know that that's an option for them. They just assume that you have to use a funeral home. And so that's another thing I like to do is really educate people, like these are the rules. You've always had this right to make this choice to keep your person at home just like we used to do. Um, you just have to use a few extra tools, which is ice instead of doing refrigeration or embalming. Um, but yeah, those traditional ways are still available everywhere.
Are there parts of the country where home funerals are more common, or are there cultures or subcultures in America in particular where they are common?
Yeah, I was gonna say in America, it's really hard. I would say I have worked for all different families from all different walks of life, from all different cultures. So it's hard to say. I think the biggest part about it is that people need to be educated beforehand and know that they can do it because you do need to prepare. And since it isn't quote unquote the norm that people are used to, um, it takes some education too for the family and to show them how to do it. Um, and so with that, no, I haven't really noticed a particular place or people who really go to home funerals. It's people who learn about them and go, "That's what I want. That's what I want for my family," and come to us.
So there's no real commonality, the overlap between those types of families who make those decisions.
Not not that I know, really. I served on the board of directors for the National Home Funeral Alliance, which is a nonprofit that educates on home funerals. So yes, it's a thing and it's been a thing for quite a long time. Um, and during that time, I mean, we educate everywhere, anybody. Um, death is one of the most human things, as is birth. We're all going to go through it. So I haven't really noticed anybody in particular who chooses home funerals versus somebody else. It's just knowing that that's an option and saying yes to it.
And thinking broadly, and one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is that you're one of the people now. I'd say of the all the people I've interviewed, and I've interviewed quite a few. You've experienced more funerals than just about anyone I've encountered.
Yeah. It's interesting, one of the classes I teach is how to plan your own funeral, and we started off with asking, "Have you ever been to a bad funeral?" And almost every single person raises their hand, whether the person's identity wasn't properly their pronouns weren't used, or or the pastor said their name wrong over and over again, or it became this fire and brimstone type service and they have no idea whose funeral they are at. So that's like the most common bad funerals. And it wasn't until recently that I realized, oh, I've been to hundreds of bad funerals. I always just thought about my own family and those experiences, but um, yeah, I've been to a lot of really, really bad funerals, and I've been to some really beautiful, amazing, moving funerals. And so I think, I have a VIP access to what most people do and how to do it really, really well and how not to do it.
You've outlined a couple elements that come with bad funerals. What elements come with good funerals?
I think a good funeral is a place, again, it sets the stage for love and grief. And the best way to do that is bring the person who died to that stage, right? We need to know who we're grieving. So having lots of photos, having things that are them. I did a funeral once for a beekeeper. And so we had flowers or flower seeds that we gave away to everybody at the end of the service and said, go plant these for the bees, right? So it was a thing that was unique and special to him, but it also was something that could continue in these people's lives, right? They get to grow flowers in his memory, and when they see the bees, they can remember him. So little details like that can make such a difference because we really do need time to grieve. And if it's just a 2-hour mass where they maybe read a little mini obituary, it doesn't really do the same thing versus planting flowers that you know this person would love and the joy that it gives you to see them, blossom later